No one could ride the ice beast. Until her. They told her she couldn't even look into a dragon's eyes, that to do so was to invite death. On Arkynis, humans were not riders, not equals, they were expendable. Yet one girl barefoot, voiceless, forgotten didn't look away. And the dragon didn't burn her. What began as a silent exchange between predator and prey soon grew into something the world wasn't ready for. In the coldest corners of a civilization built on control, she offered something forbidden: trust. This is not a story of conquest. It's a story of rhythm, of breath, of eyes meeting across species and centuries. Of a girl who changed everything, simply by listening. Under the pale, flickering light of Arkynis' twin moons, the frost-choked corridors of the dragon pens breathed with a low, distant sound of slumbering giants. Ice clung to the walls in jagged spires, and the air stung with a cold so sharp it seemed to cut thought itself. Inside these labyrinthine chambers, where the mighty Velkyr kept their beasts caged like living war machines, moved a figure too small to matter, at least to them. Her name was Lyra. A human. An orphan. Property of the Dominion. Each morning, she awoke on a cot lined with frost, and each night she crawled back to it with fingers numb and raw, her tasks complete, scrubbing feeding troughs, hauling blocks of frozen meat, and chipping waste from the scales of creatures bred to kill. The other human workers kept their heads down. They never looked into the eyes of the dragons. It was said to invite death, to awaken the beast's blood rage. But Lyra didn't look away. She watched. Not just watched, studied. Behind the pretense of labor, her gaze lingered. On the ripple of scale over muscle. On the way a beast's pupils dilated at sound. On how one exhaled when another approached. She noticed patterns, silent gestures, rhythmic tail twitches, the low hums buried in their throats like the memory of ancient songs. Especially from one dragon. The one they called Frostbane. Its pen was kept deeper than the rest, buried beneath layers of obsidian steel gates and plasma grids. They said it had incinerated 5 riders in a single breath and crushed another underfoot before its wings ever opened. Now it slept or seemed beneath a dome of enchanted ice that glowed faintly with internal storms. Lyra felt drawn to it like a tide to the moon. So one night, when the guards dozed and the energy grid flickered, she slipped away from her sleeping quarters. Barefoot. Silent. No weapons. Only breath and pulse and the sound of her heartbeat growing louder as she approached the forbidden gate. She bypassed the alarms. Not by hacking, she had no tech, but by listening. She'd watched the engineers. Learned their rhythm, their sequences, the way their fingers danced across control panels. One mistake would mean death. But she didn't shake. The final door hissed open. A bloom of cold washed over her. Inside, silence. Vast and humming. Frostbane lay coiled at the center of the chamber, its colossal body wrapped in a spiral of scale and shadow. Blue ice vapor trailed from its nostrils as it breathed, slow, deliberate, as if dreaming something ancient. Its wings, folded against its body, shimmered with a faint silver membrane, delicate yet massive, like sails carved from frozen light. Lyra stepped inside. The air shifted. Her every breath crystallized. She expected the beast to stir, to rise with a roar, to bathe her in white flame and fury. It did not. Instead, a golden eye, just one, peeled open. And looked straight at her. Not with rage. Not even curiosity. It looked as if it already knew her. For a heartbeat, for a moment longer than any moment should stretch, they stared at each other. Girl and dragon. Fragile flesh and eternal scale. Mortal and myth. And in that silence, something shifted. Not in the room. Not in the air. In the world itself. Something unseen, something sacred, acknowledged the connection and did not reject it. The dragon blinked once, slowly. A motion like a door closing, or opening. Lyra didn't run. And Frostbane didn't roar. In the coldest place on the planet, where breath froze and death waited in silence, two beings from opposite ends of power and species met without violence. And the first crack in the ancient order began to form. The nights on Arkynis were long enough for stars to drift across the sky like silent watchers, and for the winds to carve songs into the snow. And each of those nights, while others slept in fear or exhaustion, Lyra returned. She said nothing. She brought no tools, no offerings, no control devices like the Velkyr used. Only breath. Only presence. Each time she crossed the threshold into Frostbane's chamber, the cold greeted her like a ghost. It soaked through her clothes, made her bones ache, numbed her fingers until they trembled. But she didn't flinch. Instead, she stood at the edge of the beast's realm and listened. The dragon never moved at first. It simply lay there, coiled like a frozen storm held in suspension, its armored sides rising and falling in slow, glacial rhythm. And Lyra began to match it. One inhale. Hold. Exhale. Again. And again. Her small chest mirrored the dragon's cavernous lungs. Her limbs followed its subtle motions, a shift of weight, the flick of a claw, the twitch of a tail that seemed to trace invisible patterns in the frost. By the fifth night, she was no longer just imitating. She was joining. The chamber itself felt changed, less like a cage, more like a cathedral. The temperature remained deadly, but the silence grew warmer, more alive. Frostbane began watching her with both eyes now. Not as a threat. Not even as prey. As something else. When she sat low to the ground, legs folded, spine straight but relaxed as if bowing not in submission, but in understanding. And the dragon responded. At first, it shifted its body slightly, the coils loosening. Then its breathing altered, sinking closer to hers. Then one night without warning it lowered its massive head. Its crown of ice-blade horns cast fractured moonlight across the chamber floor. Its breath rolled out in misty waves that shimmered in the air like drifting memories. And it came to rest just a few meters from her, a mountain bowing to a whisper. She didn't reach out. Not yet. She knew better. Instead, she closed her eyes, and breathed. In. Hold. Out. And she felt it not in the air, but in the space between them, a tension unraveling, a string pulled taut over lifetimes now going slack. The beast wasn't submitting. No. This was something older. Purer. It was recognition. She didn't command it. It didn't yield. They agreed, silently, mysteriously. Two lives, one ancient, one just beginning, occupying the same breath, the same rhythm. In a world where everything was ruled by domination and fear, something else began to bloom here. Trust. Delicate as frost on skin. And just as easy to shatter. But for now, it held. It was inevitable. Whispers, once fragile as wind through snow-laced trees, had grown louder. The Velkyr elite, those cold-eyed lords swathed in plated armor carved from glacial obsidian, had heard. Servants muttered of strange behavior in the lower pens. Guards spoke of a dragon that no longer roared when the human girl approached. Rumors, they said. Impossible. But rumors, on Arkynis, had weight. And weight drew attention. So the bond could no longer stay in the shadows. When the truth reached the High Court of Riders, It was met not with curiosity but with fury. For to the Velkyr, the beasts were not partners. They were weapons. Sacred bloodlines bred for dominance, not affection. And if a human a labor orphan with no name, no crest, no right could walk among the monsters and leave unburned, then the entire foundation of Velkyr supremacy began to crack. The answer came swift and cruel. Commander Velkyr. He emerged from the frost fog like a relic of an older, bloodier age. His armor bore scars that shimmered faintly with ancient venom. His face sharp and cold as an ice axe had never known mercy. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of ritual. If the creature is tame, let it bear her weight. If not, it dies. It was not a request. They called it the trial of dominion, a sacred rite used to test the worth of beasts destined for battle. But never before had it been declared for a human. And never for Frostbane. The news spread through the fortress like wildfire beneath the ice. Workers went still. Guards stared in disbelief. Even some of the younger Velkyr whispered doubts. She'll be torn apart. No one's ever touched that one. It's a death sentence. Lyra was given no time to prepare. No chance to speak. Her fate had already been spoken aloud in a voice that echoed through stone halls like prophecy. She will either ride the beast, or it will burn with her. They gathered at the Sci-Fi arena, a massive amphitheater carved into the mountainside, where breath turned to fog and the wind itself carried the scent of blood. The stone floor bore the scorch marks of centuries, remnants of battles, trials, executions. The audience filled the terraces, nobles in gleaming armor, their helms shaped like dragons' skulls, scholars clutching tablets, soldiers lined in cold rows. At the center stood Velkyr, his breath misting beneath his visor, eyes locked on the small figure escorted into the circle of frost. Lyra. She wore no armor. No crest. Just the same threadbare tunic she cleaned stables in, now soaked in cold sweat and determination. Her boots crunched softly against the frostbitten earth as she approached the gate. Across the arena, the doors groaned open. Chains rattled. And Frostbane stepped into the light. It didn't roar. It didn't snarl. It moved like a storm, remembering how to rise, muscles coiling beneath an ocean of scale, wings trailing frost that glimmered like shattered stars. Its breath misted through its nostrils in twin plumes, twin warnings. But its eyes found her. And they didn't burn. In the crowd, Velkyr nobles leaned forward. The silence was heavy, expectant. Waiting for a scream. For a flash of flame. For proof that humans were still beneath them. But Lyra didn't scream. She didn't run. She stepped forward. And the trial began. The cell was little more than a hollow carved into ice and silence, no bars, just a field of humming static that tingled against the skin like tiny electric snowflakes. Lyra sat within it, knees pulled to her chest, her breath fogging the air in slow, steady rhythm. The stone beneath her was etched with claw marks not hers. She wondered how many had sat here before, how many had vanished after. They hadn't killed her. Not yet. But they had taken her name from the wind, erased her from the records, spoken of her only as the girl. The one who dared ride what was never meant to be ridden. Outside the walls of her confinement, the world did not stand still. It shivered. Because something had changed, not just in the arena, but in the eyes of those who watched. The moment Frostbane bowed had rippled outward like cracks in a frozen lake. Not loud, but deep. And the youth, always the first to hear things that don't echo, had begun to listen. In training pits, apprentices lowered their whips and tried instead to mimic the posture they saw Lyra use in a replay loop broadcasted in secret. As Soft leaned forward. a breath time to the beasts. An outstretched hand, not to command, but to ask. Some were bidden. But others weren't. A young Velkyr girl, barely of age, stood face to face with a flame-backed Wyrm known for killing 3 handlers. Instead of towering above it like she'd been taught, she crouched low, meeting its eyes at an angle of humility. The Wyrm did not lunge. A group of students began calling it the mirror stance. Others whispered it had no name, only intent. Even the creatures themselves had started acting differently. In the stables, where dragons once snarled and snapped in endless loops of agitation, some had begun pressing their foreheads to the walls, waiting for something. Or someone. High commanders scoffed. Elders dismissed the shifts as coincidence. But late at night, behind stone doors and flickering flame crystals, arguments began. Control breeds stability, said the old ways. But what if control is the weakness? Someone whispered. One child barely taller than a war beast's knee tugged at his mother's robe during a ritual feeding. His voice was small, but clearer than ice when it cracks. What if they are not beasts, but allies? No one answered. But someone listened. And the silence that followed was not dismissal. It was the silence of a world beginning to question itself. In the aftermath, she was locked away, erased from the record. But the silence she left behind was louder than any roar. Young warriors began to question their teachers. Creatures once considered wild began to wait at the edge of their pens, not for orders, but for understanding. And somewhere deep in the icebound halls of Arkynis, a child whispered the question no elder dared ask. What if they are not beasts, but allies? Now, we ask you, if you had the chance to speak to something ancient, something feared, would you try to control it? Or would you listen? Let us know in the comments what you would do. Would you dare ride the dragon? Or would you earn its trust?